We Christians accept the judgment of Jesus that the greatest two commandments are the commandment to love God completely and wholeheartedly and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Many in the Jewish community would agree with that assessment, but others do in fact identify different commandments as being the most important ones. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, August 10th, 2022. According to some rabbis, the most important commandment is found in Deuteronomy 6:7, which is a portion of the Shema. The Shema is the one that says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I'm commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children, and talk about them when you are at home, and when you are away, when you lie down, and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." We Christians latch on to the portion which commands us to love God. But in Jewish tradition, many rabbis latch on to the sentence which says, "Recite them," that is, these words, "to your children," which can also be translated as "teach them to your children." The reasoning is that studying Torah, or the law, becomes the first and most important commandment because it is necessary to study Torah in order to understand the law itself. But then there's another tradition among some rabbis which places a relatively obscure, and for us Christians, a curious law as the greatest one. It is one of the laws regarding animal sacrifice. The rabbis believe that this commandment is the greatest because it involves duties we owe directly to God, and it's important to fulfill those duties. Both of these traditions make a certain amount of sense, even the laws about sacrifice. But what about us? Do the laws governing sacrifices have any meaning for us in the Christian church today? I would argue that they do. Indeed, though not in the sense of directing us to make actual animal sacrifices on altars. So listen to this brief passage about one kind of sacrifice that's found in Leviticus. "If any one of the ordinary people among you sins unintentionally in doing any one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done and incurs guilt, when that sin that you have committed is made known to you, you shall bring a female goat without blemish as your offering for the sin that you have committed. You shall lay your hand on the head of the sin offering, and the sin offering shall be slaughtered at the place of the burnt offering. The priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and he shall pour out the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, as that fat is being removed from the offering of well-being, and the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar for a pleasing odor to the Lord. Thus the priest shall make atonement on your behalf, and you shall be forgiven." Did you catch it? This is an example of what scholars call casuistic law or case law. If this happens, then this is to be done. Sometimes it comes in the form of specific offenses, but always it takes the form of if-then. If you do this, then this is the consequence. In the passage I just read, it's an if-then commandment having to do with making a sacrifice before God. But not just any sacrifice. And that's what's really cool about this particular law and the ones that come before and after it. It's a law about what sacrifice to bring when making a sacrifice to atone for one's sins. You probably focused on the rather gory details of how to sacrifice the animal, what to do with its blood and what to do with its fat and how to burn it. But it's the very end of the law that is striking. "Thus the priest shall make atonement on your behalf, and you shall be forgiven." And you shall be forgiven. You see, what God has done here is offer a piece of grace in the form of a way to achieve atonement with God for our sin. Now, We're so far removed from animal sacrifice that it's very hard for us to connect the dots between the act of bringing an animal to sacrifice and the forgiveness that comes with it. We hear this stuff and think God must be awfully bloodthirsty to require an animal to be sacrificed. But we're looking at it all wrong. What God has done is provide the means by which we may be reconciled to God. God could have said, in effect, you sin and you're cut off for good. But that's not what God does here. God provides for our forgiveness. And it's not as though God really needs the sacrifice. It's the people who need some active means to feel that forgiveness has actually happened. In other words, the sacrifices aren't so much for God's sake as for ours. We no longer make animal sacrifices to seek our atonement before God, but we do come before God to confess our sin and hear once again the promise of God's gracious forgiveness. In a very real sense, we continue to obey this commandment each and every Sunday when we pray the corporate prayer of confession in worship. An ancient law that seems to have no relevance for us today turns out to be deeply meaningful and relevant still, even if we obey it only in a different form. Tomorrow, the laws of Jubilee. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.